Welcome to this very special edition of the Author's Voice with KAJ, a show where we explore the stories behind the stories. Here we dive into the worlds created by authors, discover their inspirations, and ensure that you walk away enriched and inspired. And today we have with us Dr. Troy Rohn. He has over 2 decades of experience in neuroscience research and teaching. And he has authored more than 60 peer-reviewed publications, placing him among the top 0.5% of scholars globally in his field. So today we talk about his book, Brain Medicine, Breakthroughs in Gene Therapy for Anxiety and Other Neuropsychiatric Disorders. So let's dive into the story behind the story. Welcome to the show, Troy.
Thank you. Thank you, AJ. It's great being with you today. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about brain medicine.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show once again, this time on the Author's Voice with KAJ. So we'll be talking about your book in detail that you have written, Brain Science and Brain Medicine. So we'll talk about all that. But first, let's understand a bit about the author part of you. How did you get in, becoming an author? Was it because you had to research a lot and write a lot? That was the obvious way to understand it? Or is there another story that is behind your story about becoming an author? What inspired you to become an author, Troy?
Yeah, I love that as a beginning question because there actually was two reasons why I wrote this book. The first reason was I was very excited about this new genetic tool that could be used in medicine and gene therapy. And I wanted to kind of demystify the science behind it. And that really came about when I helped co-found our company, Cognigenics. And we were way back in 2019, we were trying to raise capital, and we were in front of an angel investment group. And I remember this very well. There were three groups, us. One group was pitching a phone app, and another group was, and I kid you not, they were pitching some kind of toilet bowl applicator. And here we are trying to pitch this idea, this science fiction idea of gene therapy for anxiety. And needless to say, it just went completely over their heads. And I understand why. It's a very complicated science. And so I knew right then and there that we needed to be able to break this down better. And so that really was kind of the first motivation, was to try to break down the science behind gene therapy. The other motivation was just kind of my own personal, experience with anxiety. I've lived with anxiety my whole life. And I just felt like the timing was right to bring these two things together, the science and my own personal story.
Absolutely, Troy. So let's bring in the book here. Here we have got Brain Medicine. So tell us a bit about, for a common person, how should they understand what this book is all about? Or is it only for a specific, group of people, Troy?
Yeah, another great question. And I have to tell you, it's really an interesting book in terms of how it was written, because it's not a big read at all. It has less than 150 pages and has over like 50 schematic diagrams, as I'm trying to explain the basic ABCs of gene therapy. But every chapter kind of begins with a personal, anecdote of my own anxiety. And so, when I was, pitching this idea to my book agent, she was like, well, who in the heck is going to read this book? Who's the audience for this book? Because, it's not really a pure scholarly endeavor, but it's not a pure biographical, story of my anxiety. It's a blend. And so the audience, what I've found since the book's been out since last May, is my family, they love reading like the first few pages of every chapter because that's what really interests them. But then my students, I've had the opportunity to kind of use the book and as kind of a supplementary read in several of my classes. They love it because it really kind of brings home the science, but also kind of shows them how we have this, this idea about translational research, how we can go from an idea like gene therapy to eventually potentially treating somebody with anxiety. And then learning the science is kind of reinforcing some of the things that, they're already learning in class. So, I don't know who the book is for, but I do know it's really usually for someone that just has a real interest in their own kind of brain biology, but also wants to learn more about, why people have anxiety and in the circuitry and what gene therapy can do to improve, durable outcomes for people that have anxiety disorders.
Absolutely. What's inside the book? How should they understand, anxiety in your the way you have explained, so that they should know, okay, this is what I'm getting inside the book, and this is why I should read this particular book, and they can only know when you explain to them.
Yeah, I think that if I had to just like really zoom out, talk about what the book's about, it's really brain medicine is about redefining how we treat anxiety. So the current kind of strategy is to treat the symptoms. And so I go through kind of the current medications like the SSRIs, Zoloft, Prozac, and the benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax. Talk about the traditional treatments, these legacy treatments, and how they really just kind of an outdated approach. And what brain medicine is trying to do is reframe that to not managing, but really getting to the core, right? So picking out the circuitry, picking out the molecular lever that's really driving these anxiety circuits. And so there's a lot there that has to be explained, right? So what is anxiety? What are the circuits? What are these molecules? And then talking about how gene therapy can produce durable changes in that circuitry. And that involves like understanding what DNA is, what RNA is, what proteins are. So, that is really kind of the broad view of the book, is really going from a symptomatic approach to really treating the underlying circuitry of what anxiety represents.
Absolutely. So, is this book, from a present point of view, or is it something which talks about more about the future that is going to come in terms of medical science?
Well, I think it's a blend because the future is already here in terms of gene therapy for other disorders. And I give examples of that in the book. For example, um, we can talk about how gene therapy now is an FDA approved treatment for sickle cell anemia and is basically a cure. We can talk about how it's a proven therapy for certain cancers. And the idea is that it really allows for precision. And again, getting at the real molecular pieces of these disorders, where I think it's kind of more, not real yet, is in psychiatry. So the model's there in terms of gene therapy tools, but we're just beginning to apply them to the brain. And I think that that's kind of where the book is on the cutting edge. Is our company, for example, we haven't even started human clinical trials yet. We're still in what's called the preclinical phase, but we're moving closer and closer. And it's just a matter of when. Now it's not if. It's not a science fiction plot anymore. These tools are real and they're being used, and it's just a matter of time before we start really using them for neuropsychiatric disorders, not just for anxiety, but disorders like depression and schizophrenia, all of these major neuropsychiatric disorders that really affect millions of people worldwide.
Absolutely, absolutely. To understand it this way for my audience, uh, Troy, is that what did you want to achieve with this book? What were you hoping, it would do for you with what you were trying to explain to people? Has that been achieved?
Well, I think one of the things I wanted to do was just, be able to have a, a book that people could understand these tools that I think is going to change medicine, and 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 really begin to understand how medicine is changing to not a one size fits all, which is what these legacy drugs represent, but precision medicine. And we're going to be able to actually look at a person's, genetic makeup, what receptors they're expressing, their, brain activity, their behavior, and we're going to be able to modulate a person, their own biology, and that's really where medicine's going. And so one of the things I really wanted people to understand is that this is the future of medicine. This is where medicine's going, is this personalized precision approach. And so, I try to do that again, but with the personal touch of somebody who's actually lived with anxiety. And I feel like, I can really speak to it, not just from a scientific perspective, but from a personal perspective and what's helped me. And it's not just about the medicines. It's a holistic approach that is really needed, behavioral and cognitive therapy, retraining the brain. All of these things are important holistic approach to really rewiring the brain. And that's kind of what I try to talk about in the book as well.
Absolutely. What about the ethical part of such a thing, especially in mental health? How have you dealt that in any part of the book? How should people understand that?
Yeah, I actually, it's a wonderful question. It's an important question because with this great power comes great responsibility. And I spend a whole chapter talking about the ethical issues of gene therapy. And, really there's three big ideas. One is, access. Whenever we talk about new technologies like gene therapy, we want to make sure that we're building something that's available to everybody, not just the elite and the few. And so that's one of the things I talk about is access. Then of course cost. You know, how can we come up with a therapeutic, a gene therapy therapeutic that's affordable, that's accessible to everybody? We look at the FDA, the therapy I was just talking about for sickle cell anemia, and it's a very complicated therapy, but a single treatment, that's all you need is one treatment, but it's over $2 million. Wow, that's just, who's going to be able to afford that? So that's a real important ethical issue. And then the last is, where does treatment end and cognitive enhancement begin? So, for example, in our preclinical animal models, we've shown that when we tune down by gene therapy, one of the important receptors is serotonin 5-HT2A receptor. Not only do we reduce anxiety in our animal models, but we greatly improve their memory. Well, who's to say that we couldn't use this just for normal people, right? And this gets into the area of cognitive enhancement. And so, that's a whole, ethical, Pandora's box that we need to really think carefully about. So the ethical issues are really important. And so I devote a whole chapter to just speaking to those issues.
Absolutely, Troy. So, does it ever occur to you that you are delving into an issue which, you know, which you also won't know how it will open up in the future? It can be used well, it can be misused, it can not work out the way you envisaged. How about the gene therapy in other situations that has already been approved? How has that result been, to understand it? Not it's the same thing, but just to understand the past form from the looking at towards the future.
Yeah, and I think you're raising a really great question. And one of the things with gene therapy are there different tools. And for example, one of the tools, CRISPR, that a lot of people have heard about, is a tool that actually will modify the DNA, which is the very essence of who we are, right? And that is really that can be very concerning to people, because you're actually going in there and indelibly changing the DNA. But there are other gene therapy tools that are more transient and temporary, and those are ones that really target the RNA. So I think that with any new technology, there's going to be learning curves, and we really won't know until they become broadly applicable. And I think a great example that we're seeing right now is with AI, right? And how AI is really just changing the landscape of everything. And you just look today. I was just watching CNN, and they had a news story about how open AI is coming out with a platform for teenagers. And that's because there's this whole new area of misuse of AI, and how it's been used. In if teenagers have used it and committed suicide, for example. And so now we realize we need these guardrails. And I think that's just the case for technology. We really won't know about gene therapy, especially when we're talking about neuropsychiatric, right? These are not lethal disorders. I think the risk benefit is much different. That calculation is much different for a fatal disorder like Huntington's disease or ALS, where people, I think, are more readily to accept any potential risk. But for something like anxiety, it's a different story. And so I think it's just something that we're going to have to navigate once these tools actually become available to the masses.
Absolutely. And since it's about anxiety, how should we understand, or how will the present and the future understand about anxiety? Is it about those born with disorders and understand it from that? Or is it, social media is also leading to a lot of anxiety, climate
Absolutely.
anxiety, so many different type of anxiety, political anxiety. And that can become a thing which will, difficult to differentiate between the person who has that DNA sort of a thing, or someone who has acquired this over a period of time and it has become who you are. How do you differentiate between those? Is that then a medical problem in that sense?
Well,
How do you answer that question, Troy?
yeah, and I think, again, I talk about this because we anxiety, you actually need it. It's adaptive. It's a part of our fear smoke detector response, and it can alert us to dangers. And so we certainly wouldn't want to completely eliminate anxiety. But when we talk about anxiety disorders, it's like that smoke detector that's blaring all the time, even though there's no longer any fire or any smoke. And it's a combination. It's a combination of our genetics, but the environment. And so I always say that, the genetics kind of loads the gun and the environment pulls the trigger. And I think what's surprising to a lot of people is the greatest risk for getting an anxiety disorder are things that happen in our childhood abuse and trauma. And not just in childhood, but throughout adulthood, these traumatic triggers, and they build on this system, and what they do is it's like a learned behavior, where we have this overactive, this alarm system that's too sensitive. And so, to get to really answer your question, it's the environment plays a huge role. And of course, we live in such a stressful world right now, but your genetics also is part of that puzzle. And so, uh, it's trying to what I'm trying to do in brain medicine is rewire those behaviors, right? Again, trying to move away from symptom management to really, like, think of your car. You got these dashboard lights that come on, but let's look under the hood. What's wrong with the engine? And not just focus on these warning signals.
Absolutely. Troy, let me ask it this way again for my audience. You have dealt with anxiety in your own way. If this was what you are working on were available today, how would you assess it? Would you go for it? Or would you still prefer to deal it, deal with it the way you have wonderfully dealt till now?
Uh, we've had talks about that within my company. Well, I have a lot of kind of, when you're dealing with entrepreneurs, right? Scientists, we tend to be much more cautious, but some of my entrepreneurs are like, give me the therapy tomorrow, And I have to tell you, I have not dealt with anxiety very well at all. I'm still struggling. Every day I struggle, and I'm actually like, I've been going through kind of a rough patch, and I'm going to get back into counseling actually. So it's a constant struggle for me. Um, I want to make sure that whatever we build is safe and it works. And so that is a process, that, that's why we have the FDA. That's why we have other drug approving bodies around the world, is we want to make sure that these therapies are safe and they work. And that's once I've proven to myself that they are, then yeah, I probably would, because frankly, I'm kind of done with the SSRIs. They don't work well for me, especially. I mean, they help with my symptoms a little bit, but I have the kind of anxiety that really comes on hard and fast. And those medications, they don't work, for that type of anxiety. And so again, we just need better tools. We've just kind of accepted what we have, and like, give a person the Zoloft and hope for the best, but we can do better. And so, that's one of the goals, again, of my company, is that's what we want to do. We want to build something better that will really help people in the long term, not just, again, providing symptomatic relief.
Absolutely. So, in a nutshell, Troy, what key insight, key message that you want readers of this book of yours to take away with them?
Well, I think one of the things I would just say, is that, I would tell people, first of all, if you have anxiety, you're not alone. This is not a weakness. It's not psychological. It's biological. And once we understand that this is a brain disorder with molecular players involved, that immediately kind of like helps clear, and it helps our understanding, right? And it reduces stigma. And I would say, I would also give the message that there's hope, that we are working on this, and that I really believe that we're going to have these new therapies available for people, and that they're going to be game changers. Not just for neuropsychiatric disorders, but for all of medicine. I tell my students, every chance I can get, that gene therapies are really going to be the medical tool of the next 50 years. And we're going to cure a lot of diseases and disorders with these tools.
Absolutely. So this is one book. You have written many, many things. Anything else in the pipeline, Troy? That anything else you are working on that you want to tell the world about?
No, I think I consider myself more of a scientific writer for peer-reviewed papers. That's really kind of my strength. I think really what I've been focusing on right now is, our company, and trying to get us to that next hurdle, which is really human clinical trials. And so, a lot of my focus now is on that and working with my fellow scientists and team members to make that a reality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much to learn about all this from you. And I'm sure a lot of people who want to connect with you also want to get hold of this book. What's the best way for them to do so?
Darn it. I knew you were going to ask me that, AJ. And I am just not a social media person at all. I have Instagram, and I'm trying to remember what my Instagram handle is, and I don't know what it is.
No
frankly.
problem. We will include that in the show notes.
That's I have an assistant that helps me with all that. She's one of these millennials that just is I have to ask her every day. Like, she goes, Troy, you got a message on Instagram, and I have to ask her, how do I access that? I have no idea. But I know that I'm on Amazon. You can find me at Barnes and Noble, our publisher, Hatherley. And then, of course, I know that if you just find me on Instagram, there's always updates and things, podcasts like your podcast. I'm sure we'll be posting it on, my Instagram, that type of thing.
Yes. That's good. You have given all the information that is needed for a show like this. Rest, you have done a lot of research, and all that is that in the book. And I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from that. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the Author's Voice with KAJ. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, AJ.